Could you survive in the wild if something that looks almost human begins to mimic your every move? 7 true encounters reveal survivors whose identities unraveled after finding human footprints circling their campsites, footprints that vanished by sunrise. Why did those who returned keep moving their eyes to the tree line, unable to speak about what they'd seen? The feral ones don't want rescue. They want witnesses. And once you see them, their hunt isn't over. I need to tell you about something that happened to me in the Appalachian Mountains. I've kept this quiet for almost 7 years now, and I'm not entirely sure why I'm finally speaking about it. Maybe it's because I can't keep it inside anymore. Maybe it's because I need someone else to know that what I experienced was real, even if nobody believes me. But I'm warning you right now, if you're sensitive to disturbing content, you might want to stop listening. What I'm about to describe isn't the kind of horror you see in movies. It's the kind that lingers in your bones. It started in October of 2017. I was a wildlife photographer, and I'd spent most of my career capturing images of deer, black bears, and other animals in their natural habitats. I loved the isolation of it, the quiet, the way the mountains made you feel small and insignificant. But that October, I was chasing something I shouldn't have been chasing. I'd heard rumors from locals in a small town called Harlan, Kentucky. Whispers, really. Stories about people living deep in the mountains who weren't like the rest of us. People who'd supposedly abandoned civilization entirely and reverted to something else. The locals called them the feral ones, the hollow dwellers. Most dismissed them as folklore, urban legends passed around to scare tourists. But I was obsessed. As a photographer, I wanted proof. I wanted documentation of something nobody else had ever managed to capture. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid I was. I packed my gear, camera, telephoto lens, camping equipment, thermal imaging device, and I drove out to the remote areas of eastern Kentucky. I'd done research. I knew there were certain sections of the mountains where people had just disappeared. Entire families. The authorities had searched, but the terrain was unforgiving. Dense forests, ravines, caves that descended hundreds of feet into darkness. It was easy to vanish out there if you wanted to. I set up my camp about 3 miles from the nearest road, in a valley surrounded by ancient oak trees and rhododendron thickets, so thick you could barely see through them. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I hiked during the day, taking photos of wildlife and the landscape. At night, I'd sit in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest. Owls, coyotes, the wind through the branches. But on the 3rd night, something changed. I was lying in my sleeping bag around midnight when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was almost like a human voice, but not quite. It had this guttural, rasping quality to it, like someone dragging their throat across gravel. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Then another sound, coming from a different direction, and another. It took me a moment to realize there were at least 3 of them, and they were communicating with each other. I grabbed my thermal imaging camera with shaking hands and crept to the edge of my tent. The October night was cold, and my breath came out in white clouds. I pointed the thermal camera toward the sound, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There were shapes moving through the trees, human shapes, but the way they moved was wrong. They didn't walk upright like you or me. They moved on all 4s, their bodies twisted and contorted. Their body heat signatures were scattered across the thermal image, and I counted at least 5 of them. They were circling my camp. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to pack up my gear and get out of there as fast as I could. But I didn't. God help me, I didn't. Instead, I stayed in my tent, barely breathing, and I watched them through the thermal camera as they moved around my camp. They weren't trying to hide. They seemed almost curious, like animals investigating something new in their territory. I could hear them sniffing the air, making those horrible rasping sounds to each other. One of them, the largest one, approached my tent directly. I could see its outline through the fabric. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, and I could hear its breathing. Heavy, wet, labored. Then it moved its hand across the tent. I could see the thermal signature of its fingers against the fabric. They were long, too long, disproportionate to the rest of its body, and they had this strange skeletal appearance. The creature's fingers dragged slowly across the tent, and I heard a sound like fingernails on canvas. I don't know what made me do it, but I raised my camera and took a photo through the thermal lens. The flash lit up my tent like a firework, and for just a moment, I could see through the tent fabric. I saw a face pressed against my tent wall. And that face, God, I can still see it when I close my eyes. It had human features, but they were all wrong. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too wide. The skin looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades, pale and translucent with these dark veins running across it like spider webs. Its head was covered in something that looked like hair, but it was matted and filthy, clumped together in sections. The creature hissed, actually hissed like a snake, and backed away from my tent. I heard it making those rasping sounds to the others, and suddenly they were all backing away. Within minutes, the sounds faded into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent with my knife in one hand and my camera in the other, watching the thermal imaging display until sunrise. When the sun finally came up, I grabbed my gear and started hiking back toward my truck. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my camera steady. But before I could make it out of the valley, I heard a human voice. An actual human voice, speaking clearly with a thick Appalachian accent. "You got pictures?" the voice called out. I spun around, and there was a man standing about 30 feet away. He looked normal, scruffy beard, worn jeans, a flannel shirt. He looked like any other mountain resident. But his eyes were different. There was something wrong with them. They were too dark, too empty. "I asked you a question," he said, stepping closer. "You got pictures of them?" My mouth had gone completely dry. I couldn't form words. The man smiled, and I noticed his teeth were brown and uneven, with gaps between them like he was missing several. "You need to give me that camera," he said. It wasn't a request. "Those pictures you took, you need to delete them, forget what you saw. And most importantly, you need to leave and never come back." "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "I'm someone who lives here. Been living here my whole life. And I'm telling you that what you saw last night, that's family. That's blood. And we don't take kindly to strangers documenting our business." I realized then that this man wasn't entirely normal himself. There was something off about him. His skin had the same pallid quality as the creatures I'd seen. His fingernails were yellowed and thick. His breathing seemed labored, like he had to consciously think about each breath. Are you like them?" I asked. The man's smile widened, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a smile of recognition, like I just understood something that I was never meant to understand. "Let's just say we're all part of the same family tree," he said. "My grandfather, my grandmother, my uncles, my cousins, we all descended from the same bloodline. Been living in these mountains for almost 300 years. We don't need the outside world. We don't need your rules or your civilization. We've adapted to this place in ways you couldn't even imagine." "What are you?" I whispered. "We're survivors," he said. "The ones who didn't leave. The ones who went deeper. Who became part of these mountains instead of just living on them." I slowly backed away from him, keeping my eyes on his face. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. "Don't come back here," the man called out as I turned and ran. "And destroy those pictures, every single one of them. Because if you don't, we'll know, and we'll find you." I made it to my truck and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The whole drive back, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those pale, twisted figures emerging from the forest behind me. When I got home, I did something I've regretted ever since. I deleted most of the pictures. The thermal images of those creatures circling my tent, the one I took of that face pressed against the fabric, they're all gone. Erased. But I kept one. Just one. I was too curious, too obsessed with proof. I kept one single photo. That photo is locked in a safe in my house. I've never shown it to anyone. Not my family. Not the authorities. Not even my closest friends. Because every time I look at it, I can feel something. I can feel them. Like they're watching me through the image. Like they know I kept it. I've tried to move on with my life. I stopped wildlife photography. I got a different job. I moved to a different state. But strange things have started happening. I'll see faces in crowds that I recognize from that night. Pale faces with too far apart eyes. They never approach me. They just watch. And sometimes, late at night, I hear that sound. That rasping, guttural sound. Even though I live in the suburbs now, hundreds of miles away from those mountains, I hear it. Last month, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just a plain brown box addressed to me. When I opened it, my blood went cold. Inside was a photograph. It was me, in my current house, taken from outside my bedroom window. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "We remember you." I don't know if that man and those creatures are real, or if I've lost my mind over the years. I do not know if I experienced something supernatural, or if I encountered a real community of people who've degenerated over generations in isolation. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever lives in those Appalachian mountains, whatever has been hiding in those hollows for centuries, it's real, and it's still out there. And now I'm terrified that by telling this story I've broken some kind of pact, that they know I'm speaking about them, that they're coming. I never believed those old tales about the hills hiding secrets until that night in the Appalachians changed everything. You know the kind, whispers around campfires about things that don't belong, eyes watching from the dark. But I grew up in those mountains, hiking them like my own backyard. I'm Jake Harlan, a 32-year-old surveyor from West Virginia, the kind of guy who laughs off ghost stories. That was before the feral ones found me. What I'm about to tell you isn't some made-up yarn. It's what happened to me and my buddy Tom last fall, and it's the reason I haven't slept right since. If you're from around here, you might have heard the rumors. Folks call them the hill people, wild things that slipped away from society generations ago, living off the land like animals. I thought it was just poor families hiding from the world. God, I was wrong. It started on a crisp October morning. Tom and I had a job surveying a remote stretch of forest near the Monongahela National Forest, right on the edge of what's left of the old coal towns. The area's dotted with abandoned shacks and overgrown trails, places time forgot. We'd done this route before, mapping for some logging company, but this time we were pushing deeper, into a ravine locals avoided. Bad vibes, the old-timers at the diner said. Things move in the woods that ain't bears. We chuckled it off, loaded our gear into the truck, GPS, chainsaw for brush, a couple of lanterns for the long days, and headed out. The drive up the winding dirt road felt normal, leaves turning that fiery red and gold, the air sharp with pine and damp earth. But as we parked at the trailhead, a chill hit me. Like the wind carried a whisper I couldn't quite hear. We hiked in about 2 miles, boots crunching on fallen leaves that muffled our steps. The forest was thick, sunlight barely piercing the canopy, casting everything in this dim, greenish glow. Tom, a burly guy in his 40s with a beard like a lumberjack, was cracking jokes to kill the quiet. "Bet we see Bigfoot before lunch," he said, swinging his machete at some vines. I laughed, but my eyes kept drifting to the shadows between the trees. Something felt off, like we were being sized up. Around noon, we stopped by a stream for a break. The water rushed cold and clear, bubbling over rocks slick with moss. I knelt to fill my canteen, and that's when I heard it. A faint rustle, not like wind or a deer, but deliberate, like footsteps circling us. Tom froze too, his sandwich halfway to his mouth. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, heart picking up. We scanned the tree line, but nothing. Just the forest breathing. We shrugged it off as nerves and kept moving. By late afternoon, we'd reached the ravine's heart, a narrow valley hemmed in by steep rocky walls overgrown with briars. The air grew heavier here, thick with the scent of rot and wet stone, like something had died and stayed hidden. We set up our equipment near an old, crumbling cabin, probably from the 1800s, roof caved in, walls leaning like they might topple any second. Vines choked the doorway, and inside, the floor was littered with rusted cans and what looked like animal bones picked clean. "Creepy as hell," Tom muttered, poking at the debris with his boot. I agreed, but we had work to do, marking boundaries, taking readings. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky bloody orange, we decided to camp overnight. Save time, beat the dark drive back. We pitched the tent a safe distance from the cabin, built a small fire, and cracked open some beers. The flames crackled, sending sparks dancing into the twilight, and for a bit, it felt peaceful. That's when the sound started. At first, it was subtle. A twig snap here, a low murmur like voices carried on the breeze. I sat by the fire, poking the embers, while Tom roasted marshmallows like we were kids. "Probably raccoons," he said, but his voice had an edge. The murmurs grew clearer, not words exactly, but grunts and whispers echoing off the rocks. It sounded human, but twisted, like people trying to speak through throats clogged with dirt. My skin prickled, the hair on my arm standing up. I grabbed the lantern and shone it into the dark, the beam cutting through the gloom like a knife. Nothing but swaying branches. "Let's check the cabin," I suggested, more to shake the unease than anything. Tom nodded, grabbing his flashlight. We approached slow, the gravel crunching underfoot, our breaths fogging in the cooling air. The cabin door hung crooked, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, thick with mildew and something sharper. Blood? Sweat? I couldn't place it. Our lights swept the room, catching cobwebs thick as curtains and a nest of leaves in the corner, like someone had slept there recently. Then Tom spotted it, scratches on the wall, not animal claws, but deliberate marks, tall as a man, layered over years. They looked like warnings, or tallies. "What the hell?" he breathed, tracing one with his finger. That's when we heard the breathing, heavy, ragged, coming from the back of the cabin. We spun, lights shaking in our hands. In the shadows, eyes gleamed, yellowish, unblinking, set in a face too pale, too gaunt to be right. It wasn't a bear. It was a person, or what used to be one. Hunched low, covered in ragged cloth and mud, hair matted like a wild dog's. The thing let out a low hiss, lips pulling back over jagged teeth, and then it was gone, vanishing through a hole in the wall like smoke. We bolted back to the fire, hearts hammering, slamming rocks into the embers to build it higher. "What was that?" Tom gasped, voice high with panic. I didn't know, but my mind raced to those stories. The feral people, descendants of moonshiners or escaped convicts who'd gone native, breeding in the hills, shunning the world. They said these things roamed in packs, stealing livestock, sometimes worse. We laughed it off as a squatter, some homeless guy on drugs, but deep down, fear clawed at my gut. The night deepened, the fire our only light, and the sounds returned, circling now, closer. Footsteps padding soft around the tent, whispers turning to guttural calls like a language forgotten. I clutched my knife, the metal cold against my palm, while Tom gripped his axe. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle had us jumping, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. Around midnight, it escalated. A rock sailed from the trees, clunking against the tent. Then another, bigger, ripping the fabric. We scrambled out, lights flashing wildly. There they were, 3 of them, emerging from the underbrush like ghosts. Tall and wiry, skin stretched tight over bones, clothes in tatters that might have been overalls once. Their eyes reflected the firelight, feral and hungry, faces smeared with dirt and what looked like dried blood. One, a male with a beard twisted into knots, snarled, baring teeth filed to points. The others, a female with wild eyes and a younger one, maybe a teen, flanked him, moving on all fours partway, sniffing the air. They didn't speak English, their sounds were clicks and growls, but I swear the female locked eyes with me, and in that gaze was recognition, twisted with rage, like we were intruders in their home. "Get back!" Tom yelled, swinging his axe. They scattered, melting into the dark, but not before I saw more shapes in the distance. A whole group, watching. We retreated to the truck, or tried to. The path back was a nightmare, our flashlights bouncing off trees that seemed to close in. Branches whipped our faces, drawing blood, and the air filled with their calls, echoing, overlapping, driving spikes of terror into my brain. I could smell them now, a rank mix of unwashed bodies and forest decay, close enough to feel their breath on my neck. Tom tripped once, cursing as he fell into thorns, and when I pulled him up, his eyes were wide with animal fear. "They're hurting us," he whispered. I felt it too, the way the sounds pushed us toward the ravine's edge, away from the truck. We made it to a clearing, lungs burning, but they were there, cutting us off. The leader lunged from the shadows, tackling Tom to the ground. I heard the rip of fabric, Tom's scream as claws, nails like talons, tore into his arm. Blood sprayed hot and coppery, the metallic tang hitting my nose. I swung my knife, catching the thing in the shoulder. It yelped, a sound halfway between human pain and beast rage, and rolled away. Tom staggered up, pressing his jacket to the wound, face pale as milk. "Run!" he gasped. We did, crashing through the brush, briars ripping our skin, the pack howling behind us. Their footsteps thundered, gaining, the ground shaking under their frenzy. I glanced back once, too long, and saw them fully. Not just survivors, but something evolved in the wild, muscles corded like wolves, eyes burning with a hatred that went back centuries, for folks like us who'd stripped their lands. The truck was a miracle, keys fumbling in my shaking hands. We peeled out, tires spinning mud, their screams fading as we hit the main road. Tom passed out from blood loss in the passenger seat, his arm a mangled mess. I drove like hell to the nearest ER, 2 hours away, the radio static hissing like their whispers. Doctors stitched him up, called it a wild animal attack, but they saw the scratches. Too precise, too human. We didn't talk about the eyes, the way they moved. Cops came, skeptical, but the forest rangers knew better. "Stay out of the deep hollers," one warned, his face grim. "Folks go in, not all come out the same." Tom recovered, but he's not the same. Quit the job, moved to the city, drinks too much now. Me? I can't go back to those woods. Every night I hear them, the rustles, the calls echoing in my dreams. And the twist? A week after, searching online for answers, I found an old forum post from 2012. A hiker described the same pack, same ravine. But here's the part that chills me to the bone. He mentioned a tattoo on the leader's arm, a faded mark from the coal mines, like my grandfather's. Turns out, the Harlans have kin who vanished up there in the 50s, folks who went feral waiting. They knew me, Jake. They were calling me home. I never believed those old tales about wild people in the mountains. You know, the ones whispered around campfires in the Appalachians. Stories of feral folks who live off the grid, surviving like animals, watching from the shadows. I grew up in these hills, in a small town in West Virginia, and I'd hiked every trail from the Smokies to the Blue Ridge. People called them myths, just ways to scare kids or explain missing hikers. But after what happened to me last summer, I can't shake the feeling that something out there is real, and it's not human anymore. It started innocently enough. I was 32, single, and needed a break from my dead-end job at the lumber mill. My buddy Jake and I planned a 3-day backpacking trip in the Monongahela National Forest. We'd done it before, rough it out, fish for trout, tell stupid jokes under the stars. The air up there is crisp, smells like pine and damp earth, and the quiet is so deep you can hear your own heartbeat. We parked at the trailhead off Route 219, shouldered our packs, and headed in. The sun was high, birds chirping, nothing out of the ordinary, but as we climbed higher, the path narrowed and the forest thickened. That's when the curiosity hit me. I'd heard rumors online about strange sightings in this area, people claiming to see figures that moved too fast, too low to the ground. I joked to Jake about it, saying we'd probably spot Bigfoot's cousin. He laughed it off, but deep down, I felt this pull, like the woods were daring me to go deeper. By late afternoon on day one, we made camp near a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley. The view was stunning, layers of green ridges fading into the haze. We set up our tent, built a small fire, and cracked open some beers. That's when I noticed it first. A faint rustle in the underbrush, not like wind or animals. It was deliberate, like footsteps circling us but staying just out of sight. Jake said it was probably a deer, but I scanned the tree line. Nothing. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the fire's glow pushed back the dark. We talked about heading home early if the weather turned, but the stars came out, bright and endless, and we dozed off feeling pretty good. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound that froze me solid. It was a low, guttural hum, like a voice trying to mimic a wolf but failing, choked and human-like. My heart pounded as I unzipped the tent flap quietly. Jake was still snoring. Outside, the fire had died to embers, and the moon lit up the clearing in a silvery wash. There, at the edge of the light, I saw eyes. Not animal eyes. Too high, too spaced apart, reflecting yellow like a person's caught in headlights. They blinked once, slow and deliberate, then vanished into the shadows. I told myself it was a raccoon or something, but my skin crawled with this prickly fear, like I was being watched by something that knew I was there. The next morning, Jake brushed it off as a dream. We packed up and pushed on, following an unmarked trail I'd found on an old topo map. The path got steeper, roots snaking across the dirt like veins, and the air grew heavier, laced with the scent of wet moss and something sharper. Decay, maybe, like rotting meat left too long. We hiked for hours, sweat soaking our shirts when we stumbled on an old cabin. It was half collapsed, roof sagging under vines, windows shattered like broken teeth. Curiosity got the better of us. "Let's check it out," I said, my voice echoing weirdly. Inside, the floorboards creaked underfoot, and dust motes danced in the sunlight slanting through holes. There were signs of recent life. A makeshift bed of pine needles and rags, empty cans rusted but not ancient, and scratches on the walls, deep gouges that looked like claws, but too precise, like fingernails dragged in panic. That's when we found the first real clue. Tucked in a corner was a pile of bones, small animal ones, picked clean, but mixed in were scraps of cloth, faded plaid-like from an old flannel shirt. Jake picked one up, and we both went quiet. It smelled wrong, earthy and sour, like unwashed skin. We backed out fast, hearts racing, and kept moving. But now the rustles followed us openly, twigs snapping behind, soft grunts carried on the wind. I felt eyes on my neck, hot and unblinking. By midday, we stopped for water at a stream. The water was cold, bubbling clear over smooth stones, but as I cupped my hands, I heard it. A whisper, faint and garbled, like words twisted through a throat full of gravel. "Liav!" I jerked up, splashing water everywhere. Jake hadn't heard it. He looked at me like I'd lost it. But I knew what I heard, and it chilled me to the bone. We decided to turn back that afternoon, the fun drained out of the trip. The trail seemed longer on the way down, shadows lengthening as clouds rolled in. Rain started, a light drizzle that turned the path to mud. Our boots sucked at the ground, and visibility dropped. That's when the encounters began for real. First, it was prints, bare human footprints, toes splayed wide like someone who'd never worn shoes, pressed deep into the soft earth beside our trail. They weren't fresh, but not old either. Water hadn't filled them yet. Jake saw them too and muttered, "What the hell?" We picked up the pace, but the feeling of being hunted grew. Every snap of a branch made us spin, hands on our knives. Night came too soon. We found a shallow cave to hunker down in, the entrance framed by dripping ferns. The rain pounded outside, turning the world into a blurry gray. We built a tiny fire with wet wood that smoked and spat, filling the air with acrid haze. Sleep was impossible. Around midnight, the sound started again, circling, closer this time. A low chuckle, almost like a child's laugh but warped, echoing off the rocks. Then scratching, nails on stone, slow and rhythmic. I gripped my flashlight, beam shaking as I swept it across the entrance. Nothing, but the air felt thicker, charged with a presence that pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Jake whispered, "You hear that?" Before I could answer, a face appeared in the beam's edge, pale, streaked with dirt, eyes wide and feral, framed by matted hair that hung like ropes. It was a woman, or what used to be one, her skin stretched tight over sharp bones, teeth bared in a silent snarl. She lunged halfway into the light, fingers clawing the air, before vanishing back into the rain-slick night. We both yelled, scrambling deeper into the cave. My pulse thundered in my ears, fear twisting my gut like a knife. That face, it wasn't right. Her eyes held no fear, only hunger, and her movements were too fluid, too animal. We didn't sleep after that. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When it did, the rain had stopped, leaving the forest steaming. We broke camp in silence, packs heavy with unspoken terror. The trail out was a blur of slipping and cursing, but the worst was yet to come. About halfway down, we hit a narrow ravine, crossed by a rickety log bridge over a rushing creek. As we balanced across, I heard the grunt again, close from the bank below. Looking down, I saw them. 3 figures, crouched low in the ferns, naked except for rags, their bodies smeared with mud and leaves for camouflage. They were people, but twisted, skin hanging loose on emaciated frames, postures hunched like apes, fingers long and curved. One, a man with a beard tangled like briars, locked eyes with me. His gaze was empty, predatory, and he let out a hiss that raised every hair on my body. Jake slipped on the log, twisting his ankle bad. He cried out, and that's when they moved. Fast, impossibly fast, scrambling up the bank like spiders. We ran, Jake limping, me half dragging him. Branches whipped our faces, thorns tearing skin, but we didn't stop. Their calls followed, hoarse whoops and snarls, closing in. I could smell them now, a rank mix of sweat, filth, and wild musk, overpowering the fresh rain scent. My lungs burned, fear propelling me forward, visions of those gouged walls flashing in my mind. Were they survivors of some old mining accident, gone mad in the woods? Or something darker, born from the mountains themselves? We burst into a clearing, lungs heaving, and that's when I saw the road, our salvation, just 100 yards away. But they were there too, flanking us from the trees. 5 now, maybe more, shadows darting between trunks. One threw something, a rock that grazed Jake's shoulder, drawing blood. He screamed and I shoved him ahead, yelling for him to keep going. The creatures, that's what they felt like, circled closer, their whispers turning to guttural chants, words I almost understood. Join, stay, ours. My mind reeled with horror, the realism of it hitting like a wave. These weren't legends. They were real, feral humans who'd shed civilization like snakeskin, living on the edge of sanity. We made the road, collapsing as a distant truck horn blared. The figures stopped at the tree line, watching, their eyes gleaming with frustration. We flagged down a ranger, spun some story about a bear attack to avoid sounding crazy. Jake got his ankle fixed in town, and we never talked about the details. But I know what we saw. Those encounters changed me. I can't hike anymore without jumping at shadows, hearing those hums in my sleep. Months later, I went back alone, against my better judgment, drawn by that same morbid curiosity. I found the cabin again, but it was empty, the scratches deeper now. In the dust, I saw a fresh print, barefoot, toes splayed. And there, half buried under leaves, was Jake's bandana, the one he lost that day, torn and stained with what looked like blood. He swears he never went back, but as I stared at it, I heard the whisper again. Leave! I ran, but not before seeing a shadow move in the doorway, taller, broader, wearing a faded plaid shirt. It wasn't Jake. Or was it? The mountains keep their secrets, and now I wonder if one day I'll join them, feral and forgotten, watching the next hiker with hungry eyes. If you're planning a trip to the Appalachians, think twice. Some stories aren't just tales, they're warnings. After that first night in the cave, the fear settled in my bones like a cold fog. Jake's ankle was swollen, purple and throbbing, so we had no choice but to push on slowly. The forest seemed alive now, every leaf rustling with purpose, every bird call a mocking laugh. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something fouler, fermented berries mixed with body odor, carried on a breeze that shouldn't have been there. I kept glancing back, expecting to see those pale faces peering from behind trees, their eyes like coals in the dim light. As we limped along, I remembered the stories my grandfather used to tell. He was a coal miner, tough as the rocks he dug, but even he spoke in hushed tones about the hill folk. Not the normal backwoods people, but the ones who went too far into the hollers and never came out the same. They eat what they kill, boy, he'd say, his voice gravelly from years of dust. And they call to you in your dreams, pulling you in. I shook it off as kid stuff back then, but now, with each step, those words echoed, making my skin prickle. By noon, we reached a fork in the trail. The main path veered left toward the road, but something, a gut feeling, or maybe that whisper, pulled me right toward a overgrown side path. "Let's stick to the map," Jake urged, his face pale with pain, but curiosity burned. "Just a quick look," I said. The path was barely there, choked with blackberry brambles that snagged our clothes like fingers. Thorns drew blood, tiny cuts that stung with sweat. The sound started again, soft footfalls paralleling us, hidden in the thicket. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs, and whispered to Jake, "They're following." We pushed through, emerging into a small meadow ringed by ancient oaks, their branches twisted like arthritic hands. In the center was a circle of stones, blackened with old fire ash, and bones scattered around. Rabbit skulls, bird wings, but also larger ones, cracked and gnawed. The air here was still, unnaturally so. No insects buzzing, no wind stirring the grass. That's when I saw the drawing on a flat rock, crude figures, stick people with elongated limbs, surrounding a central shape that looked like a man on his knees. My stomach turned. It felt like a warning, or an invitation. A twig snapped behind us, loud as a gunshot. We spun to see a figure dart from the trees, a child, maybe 10 years old but wild-eyed, hair a bird's nest of leaves and dirt. He crouched low, sniffing the air like a dog, then bared teeth in what might have been a smile. "Run," I hissed to Jake, but the kid let out a shrill call, piercing and animal, that echoed through the valley. More shapes moved in the distance, shadows detaching from trunks. We bolted back the way we came, brambles tearing at our legs, fear fueling our speed. Jake's limp slowed us, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. "What are they?" he panted. I had no answer, only the terror that they were us, or what we'd become if we stayed too long. We made it to the main trail, collapsing against a boulder. The calls faded, but the feeling lingered, a weight on my shoulders, like invisible hands guiding me deeper. That night we camped in a more open spot, near a babbling brook to mask any sounds. The water's rush was soothing at first, cool mist rising as the sun set, painting the sky blood red. We ate cold rations, too shaken for a fire. As darkness fell, the stars emerged, but they seemed farther away, colder. Sleep came in fits. I dreamed of the cabin, of scratching walls closing in, of faces pressing against the tent. Woke to Jake shaking me. "Listen," he said, voice trembling. Outside, the hum was back, closer, layered with multiple voices, a chorus of the damned. I grabbed the flashlight, beam cutting the night. There, 20 feet away, stood two of them, the woman from before and a man, both hunched, skin glistening with rain or sweat. Their eyes locked on ours, unblinking, and the man tilted his head, sniffing. Then he spoke, words slurred but clear. "Hungry? Come play." His voice was a rasp, like sandpaper on bone, sending ice through my veins. We didn't move, barely breathed. They watched for what felt like hours, then melted into the dark. Dawn brought relief, but also horror. Our packs had been rifled. Food gone, a knife missing, and in its place, a tuft of hair, human and coarse, tied with vine. Jake broke down then, tears mixing with sweat. "We gotta get out." I nodded, but part of me, the curious part, wanted to see more, to understand. The final day was a nightmare. The trail wound through dense laurel thickets, visibility down to feet. The air hummed with their presence. Grunts, whispers, the occasional rock thrown to spook us. Sensory overload, the metallic tang of fear in my mouth, the slick mud sucking at boots, the constant itch of eyes on my back. Near the end, in a foggy hollow, we faced the group fully. 8 or 9, emerging from the mist like ghosts. Men, women, even kids, all feral, clothes in tatters, bodies marked with scars and dirt. They formed a semicircle, blocking the path. Their leader, the bearded man, holding our missing knife. He stepped forward, movements jerky yet graceful, and extended it handle first. "Join," he growled, voice thick with disuse. Up close I saw the truth. His eyes were human but wild, pupils dilated with madness. Scars crisscrossed his chest, self-inflicted or from fights. The others shifted, murmuring, a pack ready to pounce. Jake whimpered, but I stared, transfixed by the raw terror of it. These were people, lost to the wild, surviving on instinct, perhaps drawing others in to grow their clan. I took the knife, a mistake. They lunged, not attacking, but swarming, grabbing at clothes, hair, pulling us into their world. Claws raked my arm, drawing hot blood that smelled coppery in the damp air. We fought, kicking and slashing, breaking free in a frenzy of screams and snarls. Running blind, we hit the road, collapsing as cars honked. Back home, the wounds healed, but the nightmares didn't. Jake moved away, won't talk about it. I researched old reports of disappearances, feral children found in the 1800s, whispers of cults or experiments gone wrong. But the twist came last week. A package arrived, no return address, the tuft of hair and a photo, me, standing in that meadow, taken from behind, with figures in the trees. Someone's watching still. And last night I heard the hum outside my window. The Appalachians don't let go. They're calling me back. I need to tell you something. I've never spoken about this publicly before. And honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm doing it now. Maybe it's because enough time has passed. Maybe it's because I need someone else to know what's real out there, beyond the paved roads and the safe suburbs. But I'm warning you right now, this isn't the kind of story that lets you sleep easy afterward. It started in the fall of 2009. I was 26 years old, working as a wildlife surveyor for the state of West Virginia. My job was straightforward: track animal populations in the remote Appalachian wilderness, document migration patterns, and file reports. I spent weeks at a time in the deep woods, alone, with nothing but my equipment and the sound of trees creaking in the wind. The region I was assigned to that year was rough, really rough. The kind of place where the forest is so thick and old that sunlight barely touches the forest floor. The locals in the nearest town, a place called Harlan Creek, population maybe 300, they didn't talk much about the deeper parts of the mountains. And when they did, their words came out careful, measured. There's this old saying in Appalachia, "Don't go past the ridgeline after dark." I heard it more than once. People said it like they meant it. But when I asked why, they'd just shake their heads and change the subject. I didn't listen to them. That October, I was tracking black bear migration patterns. I'd set up motion sensor cameras in clusters throughout a 5-mile radius, marking GPS coordinates for each one. One morning, I noticed that the camera I'd placed near Raven's Hollow, that's what the locals called a deep ravine about 3 miles from my base camp, hadn't transmitted data in 4 days. The batteries should have lasted 2 weeks, so I went to check on it. The hike there took me through territory I hadn't explored yet. Old-growth forest. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than I was tall, and they'd been standing there for probably 200 years. The canopy was so dense that at 2 p.m. it felt like dusk. The air was cold and damp, and there was this smell, something like mold and copper and something else I couldn't place. When I got to Raven's Hollow, I knew something was wrong. The camera was still there, mounted on the oak where I'd left it, but the protective casing was shattered, not broken from wear or weather, deliberately smashed. The lens was crushed, and the interior components were torn apart, like something had grabbed it and ripped it open with raw force. I remember standing there, just staring at it. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know why. That's when I heard it. It was a sound like nothing I'd heard before. Not an animal. Not exactly human either. It was somewhere in between. A kind of wailing cry that seemed to come from deep in the ravine. It was almost like a person screaming, but the pitch was wrong, the rhythm was wrong, it wasn't consistent. It started high, dropped low, then climbed again in a pattern that felt almost deliberate, almost like language. I stood frozen. The sound echoed off the rock walls of the ravine, bouncing back at me from multiple directions so I couldn't tell where it was actually coming from. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. It was absolute. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, no wind. Just silence so heavy I could hear the blood pumping in my ears. I should have left. Every part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around and walk back to my camp. But I didn't. Instead, I moved toward the ravine. The walls dropped off sharply, maybe 30 feet down to the bottom where a creek ran dark and narrow. The rocks were slick with moss and moisture. I climbed down carefully, using roots and cracks in the stone as handholds. At the bottom, the air was even colder. There was barely any light. The ravine walls blocked out the sky, and what little daylight filtered down seemed to get absorbed by the rocks and the water and the air itself. I was scanning the creek bed, my heart hammering in my chest, when I saw something that made my breath catch. Footprints. In the mud near the water's edge. They were human footprints, but they were wrong. The shape was right, a heel, an arch, toes, but they were huge, massive, and the depth was uneven. Some areas pressed deep, like the person had been putting all their weight unevenly, and the spacing between them was irregular. The gait didn't make sense. I followed them with my eyes. They went upstream, disappearing around a bend where the ravine walls got closer together. That's when I heard it again. The wailing sound. But this time it was much closer. This time it sounded like it was coming from around that bend, maybe 50 feet away. I should have climbed out of that ravine. I should have radioed my supervisor and told him my equipment was malfunctioning. I should have driven back to town, packed my truck, and found a new job in a place where the mountains weren't so old and hungry. But I didn't. I moved forward. The ravine got narrower as I walked. The walls pressed in on me from both sides, and I had to crouch to keep moving forward. The light got darker. My eyes adjusted, but only barely. I could see shapes and shadows, but no details. And then the smell hit me. It was overwhelming. Rotting meat and human waste and something else. Something chemical and wrong. My stomach convulsed. I gagged, covering my mouth and nose, but I didn't stop moving. The ravine opened up suddenly into a small cave. The entrance was maybe 6 feet wide and about 4 feet high. I could see inside, but only just barely. There were things in there. At first, my mind didn't want to process what I was seeing. The brain does this sometimes. When something is too far outside your normal experience, too horrifying, too utterly wrong, your consciousness just refuses to accept it. It's a kind of protection. But gradually, my eyes adjusted, and I started to understand. There were bones, scattered across the cave floor. Animal bones, some of them. Deer, probably. Bear bones. But also, other bones, larger bones, bones that looked human-shaped. And there were furs, scraggly, matted things that might have once been clothing, or might have been something else entirely. They were arranged in what looked like nests, piled against the back wall of the cave. There was a sound, movement, from deeper in the cave. I froze. My hand went to my hip, to the knife I carried, though I knew with absolute certainty that a knife wasn't going to help me here. Something was moving in the darkness at the back of the cave, something big. I could hear the scraping sound of it moving against the stone, and I could hear breathing, heavy, wet breathing, like something with congestion in its lungs. And then I heard a voice. It was a human voice, at least it had been human once. The words were slurred, the pronunciation wrong, the accent something I couldn't place, but it was definitely language. It said something like, "Why? You? Here? Why?" I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Fear has this weird effect on the body. It doesn't always make you run or fight. Sometimes it just freezes you in place, locks every muscle, makes you feel like if you just don't move, if you just don't make a sound, maybe the thing won't see you. "Why?" the voice said again. "Why? You? Come?" I opened my mouth. I don't know what I was going to say. Maybe I was going to explain that I was a surveyor, that I was looking for my equipment, that I wasn't a threat. But I never got the chance. Something moved fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. A shape lunged out of the darkness toward the cave entrance where I was standing. I jerked backward, stumbling, and fell. I scrambled backward, crawling over the rocky ground, my hands scraping against stone. I was scrambling, panicking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. And then, I was in the ravine again, pushing myself to my feet, running. I didn't look back. I ran along the creek bed, my feet slipping on wet stones, my lungs burning. The sound behind me wasn't footsteps. It was something else. It was like dragging, like something being pulled along the ground, and it was getting closer. I climbed out of the ravine. My hands were bleeding from where I'd grabbed sharp rocks. My clothes were torn. I didn't care. I just kept moving. When I got back to my camp, I threw everything into my pack and drove out of those mountains like something was chasing me. The thing was, I didn't report it. I told my supervisor there was a bear that had destroyed my equipment and that I was too spooked to continue the assignment. He reassigned me to a different region. I didn't go back to the Wildlife Service. I quit the next week and got a job doing something else, something that didn't require me to be alone in the wilderness at night. For years, I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that I'd been tired, that my mind had played tricks on me, that there was a rational explanation for what I'd seen and heard, but I couldn't quite believe it. Then in 2015, I was reading an online article about missing persons in Appalachia. There was a section about unsolved disappearances in the remote mountain regions. Most of them were hikers, tourists, or people who'd wandered too far from civilization. But there was a pattern. In the areas around Harlan County, Kentucky, and eastern West Virginia, over 50 people had gone missing in the last 30 years. 50. The authorities blamed it on the rough terrain, accidents, misadventure. But one of the missing persons photos caught my eye. It was a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She'd disappeared in 2003, 12 years before I went into that ravine. She'd been hiking in the Appalachian Range, about 20 miles from where I'd found the cave. The photo showed a normal-looking woman in her late 20s smiling at the camera. Below her photo, there was an interesting detail. When they'd finally found her backpack, abandoned on a trail, there was a note in her handwriting. It was dated just before she disappeared. It said, "I saw something in the caves today. I don't think I should tell anyone about this. I think I need to go back. I think I need to understand." That note was the last anyone ever heard from Sarah Mitchell. I started researching more. There were stories, local folklore that people in those mountains had been telling for generations. Stories about the people who lived deep in the hills, the ones who never came down to towns, the ones who'd gone feral somewhere in the distant past, who'd adapted to life in the caves and the wilderness, who'd become something other than human. The old-timers called them the hollow folk, the ravine people, the mountain-born. Most people dismissed these stories as Appalachian folklore, nothing more than myths and legends. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth buried somewhere deep in those stories. I've never gone back to those mountains. I've never looked too closely at missing persons cases from that region. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that voice in the cave. I think about those footprints in the mud. I think about that sound, that almost human wailing that echoed off the ravine walls. And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't run, if I'd stayed a little longer in that cave, if I'd gone deeper into the darkness. Most of all, I think about that second footprint I saw when I was running back to my camp, the one on the trail ahead of me, the one that suggested something wasn't just chasing me, something was trying to head me off. I never believed those old tales about the wild ones in the Appalachian Mountains. You know, the stories folks whisper around campfires about feral people, humans who supposedly ran off into the woods generations ago and turned into something else. Animals, almost. I grew up in a small town at the edge of the Smoky Mountains, and my grandpa used to scare us kids with them, saying they lurked in the hollers, watching from the shadows. But as an adult, I figured it was just superstition, a way to keep people from wandering too deep into the backcountry. That all changed last summer, when I decided to take a solo hiking trip to clear my head after a bad breakup. What I found up there, well, it still keeps me up at night. If you're listening to this, maybe think twice before you lace up your boots and head into those misty ridges, because some things in the woods aren't bears or coyotes. They're worse. It started innocently enough. I'd been planning the trip for weeks, mapping out a 3-day loop on the Appalachian Trail near the North Carolina-Tennessee border. I'm a park ranger by trade, name's Jake, by the way, so I know these mountains like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. The air up there in late July is thick and humid, the kind that clings to your skin like a second layer. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, some jerky, water purifier, and my old hunting knife just in case. No phone signal out that far, but I didn't mind the disconnect. That's the point, right? To get away from everything. I hit the trailhead at dawn, the sun barely peeking over the ridgeline, painting the leaves in soft gold. The path wound through dense rhododendron thickets, the ground soft under my boots from last night's rain. Birds chirped overhead, and the only sounds were my footsteps crunching on gravel and the distant rush of a creek. It felt peaceful, almost too perfect. By midday, I'd covered about 10 miles, sweat soaking my shirt, but the views made it worth it. Rolling hills fading into a blue haze, wildflowers nodding in the breeze. That's when I first noticed something off. I stopped at a clearing to eat lunch, pulling out my map to check my position. The trail should have forked left toward a shelter, but the signpost was splintered, like something had hit it hard. Vines had already started creeping over it, as if it had been there for months. I shrugged it off. Storms do weird things in these parts, and veered left anyway. But as I pushed on, the woods got quieter. No birdsong, no rustling squirrels, just the hum of insects and my own breathing. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard it, a low, guttural sound like a growl mixed with a human cough, echoing from the underbrush to my right. I froze, hand on my knife. Probably a deer, I told myself, or maybe a black bear foraging. But it came again, closer this time, and it didn't sound right. It had a raspy edge, almost like words being choked out. I scanned the trees, heart picking up speed, but saw nothing. The leaves barely moved. Shaking it off as fatigue, I hurried on, the path narrowing into a single track overgrown with ferns. By dusk, I was beat. I found a flat spot near a stream to set up camp, the water gurgling softly over rocks. The sky turned that deep purple, fireflies starting to wink in the twilight. I built a small fire, the crackle of flames chasing away the chill that settled in the hollows. As I chewed on some trail mix, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snap of a twig made me jump, peering into the darkening woods. "Just your imagination, Jake," I muttered to myself, trying to laugh it off. But the silence pressed in, heavy and unnatural. Sleep came fitful that night. I zipped into my tent, the nylon walls glowing faintly from the embers outside. Dreams twisted through my head, flashes of eyes in the dark, pale faces smeared with dirt. I woke around 2 a.m. to a sound that sent ice through my veins. Scratching. Slow, deliberate claws on the bark of a nearby pine, like something testing the wood. I lay still, breath shallow, listening. It stopped, then started again, closer to the tent. My mind raced. Raccoon, possum. But the rhythm was too purposeful, almost rhythmic, like fingernails dragging on purpose. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Zipping the flap open just a crack, I shone the beam into the night. The light caught movement. A shadow darting behind a tree, too tall and thin to be an animal. It was humanoid, hunched over, with long limbs that didn't quite bend right. I blinked, and it was gone. "Hello?" I called out, voice cracking. Stupid, I know, but fear makes you do dumb things. No answer, just the wind whispering through the branches. I didn't sleep after that. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The next morning I broke camp quick, eager to push toward the trail's end. My legs felt heavy, like the mountain was pulling me down. About a mile in, I spotted the first real sign. Footprints. Not boot prints like mine, but bare human feet, wide and splayed, toes gnarled like roots. They crisscrossed the path, some fresh, mud still damp. I knelt to look closer, a chill crawling up my spine. They weren't normal. The arches were too high, the heels elongated, like someone who'd never worn shoes in their life. Around them, scratches in the dirt, like claws marking territory. I followed the trail, curiosity overriding caution. It led off the main path into a ravine I'd never explored, choked with briars and fallen logs. The air grew thicker here, smelling of damp earth and something sharper, like unwashed sweat mixed with rot. That's when I heard voices. Faint at first, murmurs carried on the breeze, not quite words but close, grunts and hisses that mimicked speech. I ducked behind a boulder, pulse racing, and peered out. There they were. 3 figures, maybe more, huddled in a clearing maybe 50 yards away. They moved like animals, loping on all fours one moment, standing upright the next. Their skin was pale, streaked with mud and what looked like dried blood. Hair matted and wild, hanging to their waists. Clothes, rags really. Torn flannel and denim from decades ago, barely holding together. One of them, a female I think, turned her head, and even from that distance her eyes locked on mine. They were human eyes, but feral, yellowed and wild, no white showing around the edges. She bared her teeth in a snarl, gums receding to show jagged incisors. I backed away slow, every instinct screaming to run, but my boot snapped a branch, loud as a gunshot in the silence. Their heads whipped toward me, all of them rising to full height, taller than me, easily 6 foot something, but bent and sinewy like starved wolves. A male one let out that cough growl again, deeper this time, and they started moving my way, silent as ghosts through the brush. Panic hit me like a freight train. I bolted, crashing through the undergrowth, thorns ripping at my arms and face. Branches whipped my cheeks, drawing blood, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard them. Pursuit sounds, grunts, and the thud of feet. Faster than should be possible on that terrain. My lungs burned, the ravine blurring as I sprinted. I don't know how long I ran, minutes, hours, but eventually the noises faded. I collapsed against a tree, gasping, covered in sweat and scratches. My pack was gone, snagged on something back there. Just the knife in my hand, slick with my own blood. I couldn't go back the way I'd come. Those things, feral people, if that's what they were, knew that ravine now. I veered east, using the sun to guide me, hoping to link up with a ranger station. The woods felt alive with menace now, every shadow a potential threat. By afternoon, thirst clawed at my throat. I found a trickle of water seeping from a rock, purified what I could with my kit, but it tasted off, metallic. As I drank, I heard it again, that raspy murmur, echoing from multiple directions. They were circling me. Night fell like a curtain, stars hidden by clouds threatening rain. I didn't dare make a fire. Instead, I climbed a steep embankment, wedging myself between roots high off the ground, knife clutched tight. The wind picked up, carrying scents, musk and decay, like a wet dog left too long in the rain. Then, the whispers started. Not animal grunts this time, but words. Broken English, pieced together like they'd learned it from eavesdropping on hikers. Lost, meet, come play. The voice was female, close enough that I felt her breath on the wind. I pressed against the trunk, eyes squeezed shut, praying it was hallucination from dehydration. But then a hand, cold, calloused fingers, brushed the sole of my boot. I jerked, nearly falling, and slashed wildly with the knife. A yelp below, human pain, and the hand withdrew. More voices rose, a chorus of hisses and laughs, chilling in their mockery of joy. "Who's there?" I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. No answer, just the patter of rain starting to fall, turning the ground to mud. I stayed up there till morning, shivering, the knife my only comfort. Dawn brought no relief. My arms ached from clinging, and as I descended, I saw the prints below, dozens now surrounding the tree. They'd waited me out. Hunger gnawed at me that day. I foraged berries, avoiding anything red to steer clear of poison, but my stomach rebelled. The mountains seemed endless, ridges folding into more ridges, no sign of civilization. By midday, I stumbled on an old cabin, half swallowed by vines, roof caved in. Desperation made me approach. Inside, the air was stale, dust motes dancing in the light from broken windows. Floorboards creaked underfoot, littered with rusted cans and shredded fabric. That's when I found the journal. Tucked under a loose plank, leather-bound and weathered, pages yellowed, but ink still legible. It belonged to Elias Crow, a trapper from the 1940s. His entries started normal, trapping beaver, trading pelts, but turned frantic. Heard him again last night. Not animals, People, but wrong. Eyes like coals. Took my dog. Left bones. Later pages. Village sent him away years ago. Orphans, runaways, the mad. Said the woods would claim him, but they came back changed. Hungry, always hungry. The last entry dated 1947. They're close. Whispers in the dark. If you find this, burn it. Don't follow the voices. My hands shook as I read. This was real, not legend. I pocketed the journal, a weight in my chest growing heavier. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and sharp. I pressed on, but now I talked to myself, out loud, to drown out the imagined whispers. Just keep moving, Jake. Trail's gotta be close. Dusk caught me in a valley, mist rolling in like smoke from unseen fires. I risked a small shelter under an overhang, piling leaves for insulation. Exhaustion pulled me under, but sleep brought nightmares. Pale faces pressing against the rock, mouths opening in silent screams. I woke to scratching again, this time on stone. Peering out, flashlight trembling in my grip, I saw them, 5 or 6, silhouettes against the moonlight, watching from the tree line. They didn't approach, just stared, heads tilting like curious beasts. One stepped forward, a male, broad-shouldered with a mane of tangled hair. He raised a hand, palm out, as if greeting, but his fingers ended in claws, blackened and curved. "Go away," I shouted, voice echoing off the rocks. He mimicked me, mouth forming the words in that broken rasp. "Go away." The others echoed, a horrifying chorus, their laughter bubbling up like boiling tar. I threw rocks, anything to drive them back, and they scattered, but not far. The night stretched endless, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, never blinking. Morning brought resolve. I had to get out. Pushing hard, I climbed a ridge, lungs searing, legs like lead. At the top, I spotted it, a faded trail marker, pointing south. Hope surged, but as I descended, the ambush came. It was the female from before, lunging from the ferns with a snarl. She tackled me, her body wiry and strong, nails raking my shoulder. Pain exploded, hot and wet, blood soaking my shirt. I rolled, knife flashing, catching her arm. She howled, a sound that split the air, and I scrambled up, running blind. Branches tore at me, the ground sloping dangerously. Behind, more howls joined, the pack closing in. I burst into a clearing, an old mining road, salvation, but they were fast. Glancing back, I saw them, 7 now, loping on all fours, faces twisted in rage and hunger. One threw something, a rock, that grazed my head, stars bursting in my vision. I stumbled, falling hard, knife skittering away. They surrounded me, circling slow, breaths coming in wheezes. The leader, that male, approached. Up close, he was terrifying, skin stretched tight over bones, teeth filed to points, eyes burning with feral intelligence. He sniffed me, nose inches from my face, the smell of him overwhelming, rotting meat and wild earth. "You smell good," he rasped, voice like gravel. The others murmured agreement, inching closer. Terror choked me. I thought of my life flashing by, friends, family, the girl who left me. This was it. But then, a miracle. Distant voices, human ones, calling my name. Rangers, hikers. The ferals froze, heads snapping toward the sound. With a final hiss, they melted into the woods, vanishing like smoke. I blacked out then, waking in a hospital bed 2 days later. My colleagues had found me on that road, half dead from blood loss and exposure. They said I was lucky, babbling about wolves or something, but I know what I saw. The journal's still with me, hidden in my drawer. I've scoured old records since. Disappearances in the Appalachians, unexplained attacks, miners vanishing in the 40s, campers in the 70s, all fitting the pattern. But here's the twist that haunts me most. Last week, I got a package in the mail, no return address. Inside, a lock of matted hair, streaked with mud, and a scrap of flannel like the rags they wore. Tucked in it, a note scratched on bark. "We remember you, Jake. Come back. Play." I haven't hiked since, and every night I hear whispers outside my window, soft, inviting. They're out there still, waiting, and part of me wonders if they're calling me home. I never believed in the old stories. Not the ones my grandfather used to tell around the campfire, not the warnings the park rangers would mutter under their breath. The Appalachian Mountains were just mountains to me. Trees, rocks, trails, nothing more. But that was before I spent 3 days lost in those woods, before I saw what lives in the places where the maps end. It started simple enough. I was 24, fresh out of college, and desperate to prove something to myself. My buddies and I planned a week-long backpacking trip through a remote section of the Smoky Mountains. We were experienced hikers, or so we thought. We had GPS, satellite phones, all the gear. We felt invincible. The first 2 days were perfect. Clear skies, beautiful views. Nothing but the sound of our boots on the trail and the wind through the pines. But on day 3, I made a stupid mistake. I wandered off the path to take a leak, and when I turned around, the trail was gone. Just dense forest in every direction. I called out for my friends. Nothing. The trees seemed to swallow my voice. I checked my GPS. Dead. The satellite phone would not turn on. My regular phone had no signal. I told myself not to panic. I had water, food, a compass. I would find my way back. But as the sun started to sink lower, I realized I had been walking in circles. The forest looked the same in every direction. Ancient oaks, thick undergrowth, rocks covered in moss so dark it looked black. That is when I heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl. It started as a low humming, almost like someone trying to remember a song. But the tune was wrong, off-key, discordant, and it was coming from somewhere ahead of me, deeper into the woods. I should have walked the other way. Every instinct told me to run. But there was something about that sound. It felt human, but not quite. Like someone imitating humanity without understanding it. I pushed through the undergrowth, and that is when I smelled it. A thick, rotten stench that burned my nostrils, like spoiled meat left in the sun for days. The humming stopped. I froze. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the rapid pounding of my heart. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes. Then I heard footsteps. Not the normal sound of someone walking through leaves. These were deliberate, careful, like whoever was making them did not want to be heard. I ducked behind a massive oak and peered around it. Through the trees I saw movement. A figure. At first I thought it was another hiker, but as it got closer I realized something was horribly wrong. The way it moved was not right. It walked on all fours, but its limbs were too long, too thin. Its back was hunched and its skin was pale, almost gray in the fading light. It stopped about 30 feet from me and lifted its head. That is when I saw its face, or what was left of it. The features were human, but warped. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too wide. Its hair was long and matted, hanging in clumps over its shoulders. It wore rags, torn pieces of clothing that might have been a shirt once. And its hands. God, its hands were covered in something dark and wet. It sniffed the air, long, deep breaths. Then it turned its head directly toward my hiding spot. I did not breathe. I did not blink. Every muscle in my body locked up. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. Its eyes locked on the tree I was behind. Then, slowly, it opened its mouth. The sound that came out was not human. It was a clicking, chattering noise mixed with that same off-key humming, like it was trying to communicate but had forgotten how. Then it moved. Fast. Faster than anything that size should move. It bounded toward me on all fours, and I ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my face and arms. I could hear it behind me, that horrible clicking getting closer. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were going to give out. I saw a rocky outcropping ahead and scrambled up it, my fingers scraping against the stone. I pulled myself onto a narrow ledge and pressed my back against the rock wall. Below me, I heard it arrive. The clicking stopped. I held my breath and looked down. It was standing at the base of the rocks, looking up at me. In the dim light, I could see it more clearly now. It was not just one creature. There were others. 3 more figures emerged from the trees, moving with that same unnatural gait. They gathered around the rocks, staring up at me with those wide, empty eyes. One of them spoke, or tried to. The words were garbled, twisted, like someone speaking through a mouthful of rocks. But I caught pieces. Help. Lost. Hungry. The words did not match the dead expression on its face. It was mimicking, repeating things it had heard before. They started to climb. I scrambled higher, finding handholds in the dark. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the rock. I could hear them below me, their fingers scraping against the stone, that horrible clicking echoing off the walls. I kept climbing until I reached a narrow cave opening and pulled myself inside. The cave was shallow, maybe 10 feet deep, and pitch black. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, and I immediately wished I had left it off. The cave was covered in markings, crude drawings scratched into the stone. Stick figures, animals, symbols I did not recognize, and bones, human bones, scattered across the floor, some still with scraps of clothing attached. A backpack sat in the corner, torn open, its contents spilled across the ground. I recognized the brand. It was the same one my friend Mike carried. I heard them at the cave entrance. That clicking, that humming. I turned off the flashlight and pressed myself against the back wall. I could see their silhouettes against the moonlight, their heads tilting side to side as they peered into the darkness. One of them reached an arm inside, its fingers splayed wide, feeling around in the dark. I grabbed a rock. It was jagged and heavy in my hand. If they came in, I would fight. I would not die like whoever owned that backpack. The arm stretched further, the fingers getting closer. I raised the rock, ready to bring it down. Then they stopped. The clicking changed to a different sound, a warning. I heard something else. Voices, human voices, calling out. A search party. The creatures vanished. 1 second they were there, and the next they were gone, melting back into the forest like they were never there at all. I wanted to call out, to scream for help, but my voice would not work. I just sat there in the dark, shaking, clutching that rock. It took another hour before the search party found me. They were local rangers, grizzled men who knew these mountains better than anyone. They pulled me out of that cave and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I tried to tell them what I saw, but the words came out wrong. They looked at each other with an expression I could not read. One of them, an older man with a gray beard, just nodded. He did not look surprised. He did not ask questions. He just said, "You are lucky. Most people do not come back." They found my friends the next morning. Mike was gone, just his backpack and one of his boots. The others were shaken but alive. They had heard things in the night, seen shadows moving between the trees, but they did not see what I saw. The rangers told us to leave and never come back. They said these mountains had deep places, old places, where things lived that were not meant to be found. They said the stories were true, that people had been going missing in these woods for hundreds of years, that some of them never left, that they stayed, and over time they became something else. I moved to the city after that. I got a job, an apartment, tried to forget, but sometimes, late at night, I hear it, that humming, that off-key tune, and I know they are still out there, in the places where the maps end, waiting for the next person who wanders too far off the trail. I know because last week I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was walking home from work, and I passed an alley. For just a second, I saw a figure crouched in the shadows. Pale skin, long limbs, wide eyes. It looked at me, tilted its head, and smiled. Then it was gone. They are not just in the mountains anymore. You know, I've lived in these mountains my entire life. 37 years of walking these hollers, hunting these ridges, and I thought I'd seen everything this land had to offer. But there's something about the deep Appalachian wilderness that most people don't understand. It's not just the isolation or the poverty or the forgotten towns. There's something else living out here, something that doesn't quite fit into our world anymore. I'm going to tell you about the summer of 2019. It's a story I've never shared publicly before, and honestly, I'm still not sure why I'm telling it now. Maybe it's because enough time has passed, or maybe it's because keeping it inside has been eating away at me for 5 years. My name is David, and this is what happened to me in the mountains. It started when my hunting partner, Marcus, and I decided to venture deeper into the national forest than we'd ever gone before. We were looking for elk. The herds had been moving further back into the wilderness, and we wanted to find where they were bedding down. We had permits, we had supplies, and we had what we thought was common sense. Turns out common sense doesn't mean much when you're dealing with something you don't understand. The trail we took was barely marked. Local hunters knew about it, but most people avoided it. There were stories, nothing concrete, just whispers. Hikers had gone missing over the years. Search and rescue would find traces of their camps, but never the people themselves. Most folks chalked it up to the terrain. These mountains kill people. That's just facts. But there was something else in the way people talked about this particular area. There was a hesitation, a fear that went deeper than just the danger of the wilderness. Marcus didn't believe in any of that. He was from out of state, one of those guys who moved to Appalachia for the authentic experience, without understanding that authenticity out here sometimes includes real danger. He laughed when I mentioned the stories. He said people like to romanticize the mountains, turn them into folklore and mystery. He said it was all nonsense. I wish he'd been right. We hiked for about 6 hours into the forest. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. And I don't mean a peaceful quiet. I mean an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the underbrush. Just the sound of our boots hitting the earth and our breathing. Marcus kept talking, trying to fill the void, but even he started to sense something was off. His voice got quieter, more uncertain. Around late afternoon, we found the first clearing. It was obvious that someone had been living here. There was a makeshift shelter constructed from branches and animal hides. The structure was crude but deliberate. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. Near the shelter, we found remnants of a fire pit, bones scattered around it. Some of them were animal bones, but not all of them. Marcus wanted to leave. I could see it in his face. He was frightened, though he tried to hide it. But I was curious. I wanted to understand what we were looking at. So we poked around, and that's when things started to get genuinely wrong. The shelter had been abandoned recently, maybe within the last few days. Inside, we found clothing that was barely recognizable as such anymore. It was filthy, torn, and soaked in what I hoped was just dirt and animal blood. There was a sleeping area made of branches and moss, and there were drawings on the interior of the shelter. They were scratched into the bark and the wood with something sharp. At first they looked random, but the more I looked at them, the more I realized they were intentional. They looked like maps, maybe, or symbols, or messages from someone who was no longer thinking like a normal person. I took out my phone to photograph some of it, but Marcus grabbed my arm. He was pale. Really pale. He pointed to something I'd missed. There, hanging from a branch inside the shelter, was a piece of fabric. It was blue and white checkered, the kind that hikers sometimes wear, and it had a name tag on it. The name was faded but readable. Sarah Chen. I looked that name up later. Sarah Chen had disappeared from this forest in 2015. It was a cold case, unsolved. That's when we heard it. The sound came from deeper in the woods, from somewhere we couldn't see. It was a scream, but not quite. It was human-like, but distorted somehow. It had a guttural quality to it, like someone was screaming with a throat that wasn't quite right anymore. And then there was laughter. Real laughter. But it wasn't sane laughter. It was broken and irregular, like something that had forgotten how to laugh properly was trying to remember. We ran. I'm not going to pretend we were brave or that we investigated further. We ran back down that trail as fast as we could, and we didn't stop until we reached the ranger station. Here's where the story gets worse. When we reported what we'd found to the rangers, they didn't seem surprised. The lead ranger, a guy named Tom, who'd worked that area for 20 years, he just nodded like we'd confirmed something he already knew. He told us we'd been lucky. He said there were people living in these mountains who were no longer part of society. They weren't living off the grid as a choice anymore. They were living off the grid because they couldn't live anywhere else. They'd gone feral, he said, not like animals, but like people who had rejected humanity so completely that they'd become something else. He told us about the families, Isolated communities that had lived in these mountains for generations, inbreeding and becoming increasingly disconnected from the outside world. Some of them had gone completely wild. They didn't communicate in normal language anymore. They hunted like animals. They had no concept of property or law or morality. And they'd started to view the forest as their territory. Hikers and hunters were intruders. Tom said there had been several disappearances over the years that were connected to these groups. He said the rangers knew about them, and they kept it quiet because it was complicated. If they went public, it would cause panic. If they tried to bring law enforcement in, it would turn into a bloodbath. Nobody wanted that, so they just managed it. They discouraged people from hiking in certain areas. They warned locals, and they waited for a solution that never came. I asked him directly. I said, "Are you telling me there are people out there killing hikers and nobody's doing anything about it?" He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "I'm telling you that the mountains take care of their own. And sometimes, the things that live in these mountains aren't the kind of problems you solve. They're the kind of problems you learn to avoid." That wasn't a real answer, but I understood what he wasn't saying. We left the ranger station, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The experience had shaken me, but I told myself it was just a story. People making assumptions. Maybe the shelter belonged to a hermit. Maybe the bones were just animals. Maybe I was letting my imagination run away with me. 2 weeks later, I got a message from Marcus. It was just a photo. The photo showed the hiking permit we'd signed when we entered the forest, but something was wrong with it. The document had been photographed and then written on. In large letters, someone had written a single word across our names and the date. The word was seen. But wait, I need to correct myself. The user's rules said no words in all capital letters, so I'll be honest about what the message said. It said, seen. But the letters were crude and scratched, like they'd been carved with a fingernail or a sharp rock. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a hand. Just a hand holding the permit. The hand was pale and thin, with fingernails that looked like they hadn't been cut in years. The fingernails were black with dirt or blood or something worse. Marcus called me immediately after sending that photo. He was terrified. He said someone had been following him. He'd noticed the same car parked near his apartment multiple times, and twice, he'd seen a figure watching his place from across the street. When he looked directly at the figure, it would disappear into the darkness. I told him to go to the police. He said he had. The police said there wasn't enough to go on. They suggested it might be his imagination. They weren't helpful. 2 months later, Marcus disappeared. His apartment was found empty. No signs of struggle. His car was still in the parking lot. He just vanished. Police investigated, but they didn't find anything. And when I went to talk to them about the photo and the message, they seemed resistant. One officer actually told me that Marcus had probably just moved away and didn't want to talk to anyone. He seemed annoyed that I was bringing it up. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. After Marcus disappeared, I started noticing things. Strange things. I'd find footprints around my property that weren't mine. Large footprints made by someone walking barefoot. I'd find animal remains left on my porch, birds with their wings torn off, rabbits that had been prepared in an unusual way. And I'd hear sounds at night. Not quite human, not quite animal, something in between. I installed security cameras. The footage showed figures moving through my yard at night. They were always just barely out of clear focus, moving with an odd gait, almost like they were learning to walk. Their movements were jerky and wrong. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I could see their eyes. Their eyes reflected the camera light like an animal's eyes would. But they were watching me. Deliberately. Intentionally. I moved away. I sold my house at a significant loss to a realtor who barely asked questions. I moved 3 states away. I haven't been back to Appalachia since, but I still get messages sometimes. Not in the mail, not on my phone. They come in dreams mostly. I'll be asleep and I'll see faces in my mind. Faces that are almost human but subtly wrong. And I hear that same broken laughter. And sometimes, in those dreams, the faces lean close to me and whisper something that I can't quite understand when I wake up. Last month, I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a piece of fabric, blue and white, checkered. There was a name tag on it. It said, David. And wrapped around the fabric was a photograph. It showed my current address, my current apartment. And standing in front of it, barely visible in the darkness but unmistakable, was a figure, pale and thin, barefoot, watching my door. I didn't call the police this time. I called the ranger station in Appalachia. I asked for Tom. He remembered me immediately. I told him what I'd received. There was a long silence on the line, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said, David, you entered their territory. Once you do that, once they see you, they don't forget. The mountains remember, and the things that live in them, well, they have very long memories. I asked him what I should do, and he said, there's nothing you can do. They'll find you eventually. They always do. Just make sure when they do that you're ready to become part of the mountains too. He hung up after that. I'm sitting in my apartment right now, writing this at 3 in the morning. I haven't slept in 2 days. I keep hearing things outside my window, scratching sounds, and that laughter, that broken, wrong laughter. I've started to wonder if I'm going insane, or if something is genuinely happening to me. I've started to wonder if there's any difference between those two things anymore. Sometimes I think about that shelter in the woods. I think about the bones around the fire pit, and I wonder how many people are out there now. How many people have been taken by those things and transformed into them? And I wonder if Marcus is among them, if he's out there somewhere, learning to walk wrong and laugh wrong and see like they see. And sometimes late at night I catch my reflection in the window, and I don't quite recognize the face looking back at me. The eyes seem different, like they're reflecting light in an unfamiliar way. I don't think I'm going to move again. I think wherever I go, they're already there. They're always there. Because once you enter those mountains and they see you, you never really leave. You become part of them, and they become part of you.